the week's top stories. Joining us tonight is Bob Billafiore. He is a former press secretary to former Governor George Pataki, now a senior partner at Eric Mower and Associates, but not for long. And across the table from him is Steve Greenberg, former communications director to 2 Assembly speakers, and now the president of Greenberg Public Relations and a pollster for Siena College. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Great to be here.
And congratulations. Do you want to tell us your news?
Am I showing?
No, you're not showing. Tell us.
Oh, I'm leaving Eric Mower in a couple of weeks to join National Heritage Academies, which is a national charter school management organization.
Yeah,
so
it's very exciting.
No, as you know, I dig the issue. So this is a chance for me to sink my teeth back into a policy matter that I spent a lot of time working on.
And great for national heritage and bad for Eric Mower.
True, and as I should say also that, actually, I would say we would miss you, but we won't because you're not going anywhere, really.
I'm not moving. National Heritage is based in Grand Rapids, but I won't be. So I'll be based here, and if you'll take me on Tuesdays and sometimes Wednesdays, I'll be happy to come back.
And I'm sure that we will. Okay, so let's get started, and we'll start with you. As I mentioned, the AG's race getting kind of dirty out there. There were 2 debates. There was one last night in Rochester. There was one today. WAMC hosted in Albany. And not a full field of candidates showed up. Actually, 2 candidates skipped last night, Schneiderman and Rice. And then today, Schneiderman and last-minute no-show. What does that mean strategically?
I think that typically Democratic primaries are won and waged downstate, and I think Eric Schneiderman's his campaign has done a great job of lining up the traditional Democratic voter constituent groups to line up behind his campaign, and I think he's focusing his efforts on the city and on the metropolitan area, which is where a Democratic candidate should for a Democratic primary. In the end, though, that always comes with a risk, because if you're a Democrat and you run too far to the left to win a primary, it's harder to win, especially for a law enforcement office in the middle, where an attorney general generally has to be to win statewide.
And actually, does that not just play right into Sean Coffey's hands and maybe some other people who are concerned? Sean Coffey, of course, has been saying Eric Schneiderman very flatly, actually. Eric Schneiderman is running a campaign that is too liberal to beat Dan Donovan. He might win the primary, but he can't beat the Republican Dan Donovan in the general.
Well, it's an argument that Sean Coffey and a lot of others have made. Look, Sean Coffey has been the one candidate more than the others who's really focused on upstate and trying to get upstate Democrats. Whether that will help him win or not, I don't know, because Bob said it, and he's right, and you know this too, Liz. The vast majority of voters in a Democratic primary come from downstate. More than half the voters in this Democratic primary are going to come from New York City. Another quarter or so are going to come from the downstate suburbs. Only about a quarter of the vote, or thereabouts, is going to come from upstate. Traditionally, as Bob also pointed out, Democratic primary voters are to the left of Democrats, just like Republican primary voters tend to be to the right of Republicans. So it tends to be a much more liberal Democratic base. Eric Schneiderman's got the endorsement of the New York Times. That one would presumably help, certainly among Upper East Side and Upper West Side Manhattan liberals. Sean Coffey got the endorsement of the New York Post. I'm not sure how much that helps with Democratic primary voters. Look, Siena's going to go back in between Labor Day and the primary and take a look and try and talk to likely primary voters to get a sense of where they're at. But coming into these final couple weeks, when the candidates are now starting finally to spend the money they've been able to raise or lend themselves, coming into these final few weeks, we had 5 candidates who were largely unknown to the vast majority of Democrats. Voters are just starting to pay attention now. Mail is hitting, phone calls are happening, TV and radio commercials are happening. So we'll have to see how the voters respond to these 5 different candidates.
Yeah,
I think Schneiderman's running a high-risk campaign and trying to sort of run the table on the traditional left of center Democratic groups to try to win this thing. And part of it is because of the liabilities he takes on in doing that in the general. If I'm Dan Donovan, I am drafting a campaign ad with Eric Schneiderman's quote that Al Sharpton will have an annex in the Attorney General's office.
That was a big mistake.
I agree with you completely.
That is going to frighten people, and in a primary where people, even leftist Democratic voters, may not be totally comfortable with that kind of attitude that Schneiderman has.
I agree with you. I think he's gone too far, and the more difficult issue that he's going to have if he were to win the primary is that the calendar shortened. He only has 7 weeks from the primary day to election day to mount a general election campaign. And I assume Dan Donovan is sitting on the sidelines ready for September 15th and to mount an all-out attack.
Well, but his money was not there in the last filing, so it'll be interesting to see how much money Dan Donovan posts in the next filing, which for him, because he doesn't have a primary, we're going to see on Friday what these Democrats have got in the bank. But for Donovan, I think it's 32-day pre-general.
31-day, so we won't see that till the end of September.
Right.
But the other interesting thing in this race is that normally in elections, turnout comes from the top and works its way down. This is a case where I think you're going to see the exact opposite. Turnout is going to come from the bottom up. Democrats across the state are not excited to come out and vote in a down ballot race for Attorney General. I think the turnout is likely to only be in the mid-teens, like 15%, something like that. Where is turnout coming? Where you have hotly contested local races for Senate, Assembly, Congress. You have one here in the Breslin race in the Capital Region. There's certainly one in Buffalo, the Stokowski race. But the vast majority of those races are in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and there are none, as far as I know. I think there may be one on Long Island, which hurts Kathleen Rice.
It's a Republican one. It's a Republican one.
I think there's one Democrat one.
But to that point, you have a state Senate in Harlem. You have a state Senate race between Basil Smickel and Bill Perkins.
Yep.
You have the Wrangell race.
Seat.
You have Schneiderman's seat, a 4-way Democratic primary. And you have a very interesting race in Carolyn Maloney's district. And just today you saw Carolyn Maloney endorse Eric Schneiderman. So that is, I mean, definitely there's a point there. I want to move on, though, real quickly because, and I'd like to pose this question to you, it is an issue that has really upstaters, not up in arms per se, but very concerned on the Indian reservations up in arms.
Right.
It's about the collection of the cigarettes that are sold to non-Indians on Indian land, blocked in court at the state level and now also at the federal level. You guys tried this in the Pataki administration. Why can't we get this done?
Well, the Pataki administration tried it. The Cuomo administration tried it. I think the Kerry administration may have tried it. And the Spitzer administration, we all remember those 25 minutes of the Spitzer administration.
We do, indeed.
They tried it. Now, full disclosure, at Eric Moe and Associates, I had done some work for the Senecas a couple of years ago. We don't do work with them anymore and have not for over 2 years. So just so that's on the table. But it's a very difficult issue. The state taxpayers, the state would like to get the tax revenue that they think they can collect from these sales, but they're nervous. I mean, the tribes don't overtly endorse any kind of violence, but there's always the specter of doing it. A couple, during the Pataki administration, there were tire fires and barricading along the thruway. I think people just get nervous. And what amount of tax revenue is worth the potential of having a motorist driving through the reservation on the thruway shot or a trooper killed completely by accident?
Well, you're talking about $200 million that they were expecting, and actually when you talk about $100 billion budget, it's not a lot of money, although $200 million, of course, is a lot of money.
A lot of money to normal people like us, but in a $130 billion budget, it's nothing.
No.
That's true, but I think voters and New Yorkers look at it a little bit differently. I think they look at it as a fairness issue and as an intimidation issue. Why should the state of New York be intimidated? Why should we be pressured to not do what we think is the right, fair thing to do? And I think voters look at that and have some skepticism about the actions taken in the Cuomo administration, the Pataki administration, and the Spitzer administration. I think they would like to see fairness and accountability.
But if the voter sentiment is on the side of collecting the taxes, then why does every politician who had planned to run for office again backed off? You think they would have pushed the thing forward. I don't think that the voter sentiment is that clear that we should collect the money and that it's a fairness issue. One, I think a lot of those voters take advantage of tax-free cigarettes by buying them online because the state's taxes on a pack of cigarettes are what now, like $4?
Very high.
Right.
That was the increase was supposed to be that, the 58% increase that was supposed to go into effect.
Right. So voters are consumers too. A lot of them smoke and they like cheap cigarettes. So they take advantage of this and don't want to see this loophole closed. Secondly, I think they see it as a fairness issue. People genuinely feel bad for what's happened to Indians in this country. And they feel like Native Americans have been oppressed, they've been shoved on reservations, and they should be allowed to have what little commerce they can generate on their own. So I think that's a difficult issue. But every politician, David Patterson's the only one who's pushed the envelope on this, and is the only one with no political
Nothing to lose.
Well, because none of them have a plan. That's the problem. I mean, we've gone for 30 years now without a governor or anybody else coming up with a realistic way to actually accomplish the goal.
Well, you don't think that when the governor says that his plan is to put stamps on the cigarette cartons before they even get into the hands of people who are selling them, so the distributors, the onus is on the distributors, that's not a plan?
No, I mean, I'm not sure.
Oh,
I'm not sure
okay.
that that's a plan that would accomplish what it is the governor's trying to accomplish.
Right. And the policy guys, you think all of a sudden the policy guys in 2010 figured out that there was a way you could put the stamps on before the cigarettes get there? They've known about all these solutions, but whichever one they pick turns into a confrontation with the tribes, and that's one they're afraid of.
Okay, and speaking of confrontation, and this is a lovely segue. I love when you do that for me, Bob. Thanks very much.
I do what I can to help.
Speaking of confrontation, Carl Palladino.
It's why use two words when one will do? And you could say Carl Palladino or just say confrontation.
Yeah, indeed. What's going to happen is the question.
Look, I think it's a very open issue. Rick Lazio has not grabbed the hearts and minds of Republican voters, particularly the conservative ones who are going to end up voting in this primary, as low as the turnout may be. Carl Palladino has a ton of money. He needs to start spending it if he thinks he can move enough people to close the gap that Siena has shown and some of the other polls have shown between him and Lazio. But this thing is wide open for him to win.
I agree. I mean, I saw your blog item today, Liz, that he's going to start spending his money and do a 2-week blitz. I think he needs to do that to close the ground. Look, this is going to be a small turnout, a low turnout primary, and I think it'll be higher than the Democrats. My guess is it'll be somewhere in the mid-20s. But again, it's going to tend to be conservative voters, much more conservative than Republicans as a whole. And the real question for me is the Tea Party movement. Is there a real Tea Party movement in New York? It's not organized, we know that, but there are pockets of it throughout upstate, on Long Island. Will those folks come out and vote for Carl Palladino? Because that will give him a major boost. And to date, as you say, Lazio has not captured the imagination of Republicans, and he's got no money, it appears, to try and get on the air and get the attention of Republicans.
Here's how I think Republican voters are seeing it. Rick Lazio has not only captured their hearts and minds, but he hasn't. I don't think anybody thinks Rick Lazio has a chance. I don't think people think Palladino or Lazio can beat Andrew Cuomo.
Right.
But I think they think Palladino can give him a fight and make his life tough for a couple of weeks. And I don't think anybody thinks Rick Lazio can do that.
Okay, so Lazio or Palladino?
Who wins?
2 weeks from now.
Palladino starts spending his money. I think he wins.
We'll be in the field next week, and I'll be back to tell you what the Republican primary voters think.
That's a good answer to the Siena poll. But Palladino has to do one other thing. He's got to go on the air very heavy, and he's got to stop talking to you.
Thank you, Bob. That's very great. We're going to end there now because we're ending and we're out of time. Thank you very much, though, Bob Bellafiore. I really appreciate it. And you too, Steve Greenberg. Thanks. I can't believe you just said that. Still.